women have always been looked at as the weaker sex, in movies, in television, and in life, but not in this retelling of a classic tale. Welcome to Little Red Riding Hood.
Little Red Riding Hood. Draped over her crimson cloak was the shell of the monster, its weight serving as proof that she was never just quite who they thought she was. With the village in a stir, Sarah watched her mother's face closely. The worry lines grew deeper on the evenings her brother set off on the foot hunt. Each unsuccessful night bled into another. The confidence the men in town had about catching the monster had started to wane. Sarah stood in the doorframe, watching her brother catch up with the other men and their weapons of choice. As darkness hazed over, her mind got to work, conjuring up her own plan of attack. "Come inside, Sarah," her mother called. Voice pricked with a sternness Sarah didn't like. That tone started around the same time the second girl went missing. Her mother's worrying manifested in harsh overprotection. With her eyes drifting to the edge of the village where the cobblestone paths blended into the dark trees, Sarah watched. The monster responsible was in that darkness, using it as his playground to slay. Sarah jumped when her mother's hands gripped the caps of her shoulders and pulled her back inside. "It's dark, Sarah. I want to hunt with them." The perplexed look on her mother's face told Sarah a lecture was coming. "Quit saying that. Young ladies do not hunt," she scoffed. "All of the disappearances have been young girls your age, all 6 of them." Sarah didn't need her mother's reminding of what she already knew. The idea that she was the monster's ideal prey ignited a fire in her. One that the men fighting this battle didn't have. But if her mother felt so strongly about her desire to join the hunt, then what would those men think? They'd laugh at her, probably think that there was something wrong with her. As the night drew on, Sarah lay in her bed with her eyes glued to the full moon peeking through the window. It cast light over the forest, the dancing trees throwing shadows on the wall. She listened for something. Anything. A cry from a girl, a cry from the monster. When she closed her eyes, she thought of everything she would do if she were the huntress, running through the dark forest under the moonlight and misty night air, her red cloak rippling behind her. She would do what they couldn't do to that monster. Befriend him. Sarah thought of the whispered rumors she overheard as she moved through the town, tucked against her mother's side. She heard the theories that her brother relayed to their mother. One thing was for sure. Nobody knew what they were hunting for. Some said the monster was human. Only something with that skilled intelligence could act so methodically. Others thought the opposite, that only a beast would know how to hunt with such unmatched precision. Either way, its power scared Sarah. She was exactly what the beast wanted, yet what better person to lure the monster out of its lair? The next morning, Sarah played her visions of wandering into the forest. How satisfying it would be to return to the village with the kill under her belt. Maybe then her mother and brother would take her seriously. And then maybe some would no longer underestimate the power that a young girl has. All that stood between her and the forest was the tiny window facing the woods, where the rain trickled in and the smell of burning wood escaped. Sarah planned to emerge from that window when she heard her brother returning home in the night, even if only for just a peek. Sarah helped her mother in the kitchen, preparing food and aiding in the fire. She held back her questions about the monster. It wasn't something anyone wanted to talk about or imagine, leaving Sarah the odd one out. Staying quiet helped keep her plan a secret. There wasn't much of a point in sleeping, and even if Sarah tried, her nerves were buzzing too fast to let her. She counted the breaths of her sleeping mother and the footsteps of her brother as he entered the home. His sigh of defeat told her that the monster was not caught, and no girls were recovered. They were all living the same day over and over. Once it was silent, Sarah hoisted herself up to the window. Everything would change if she disappeared into the night, and that's exactly why she needed to do it. Sarah's inner huntress was ready to debut. The back of her throat burned, and the space between her ribs pounded as Sarah ran. All that held her face was the red hood draped, concealing who she was. Still, she knew her monster could smell her out. Man or beast, the scent of vulnerable prey wouldn't go unnoticed. She ran into the woods, trees whizzing past her, leaves rustling beneath her feet, unsure of what to look for. Sarah continued to run, letting the forest encompass her until she found something, or something found her. The leaves hanging on the trees and patches of grass grew dewy as dawn approached. It was only an assumption that her monster thrived in the night. Perhaps he was different in that way. Not the kind of monster who hides in the darkness, but one who actually lurks in the daylight, blending in with those around him and amongst his hunters in secret. Sarah wandered the forest as the chirps of crickets faded into those of songbirds. She told herself she was only going to go into the forest for a peek, but something told her to stay. The forest daylight broke, and in the morning the fog lifted. Her strength grew more and more as she became acquainted with the greenery. Now would be the time her mother rose to wake her for the day. But Sarah could only hope her mother would dig deeper than assuming her daughter was stolen by the village predator. If her mother really knew her, really listened to her, she would know what she was doing. The canopy of trees offered up plenty of shade once the sun rose overhead. Sarah's eyes were peeled as she scanned the layers of the forest. She searched in the soft dirt for fresh footprints, the hollowed holes in the tree trunks for eyes, and over her shoulder for any followers. While nothing presented itself to her, Sarah knew she was being watched. She could feel a distant gaze on her, nearly swearing there was a strong heat lurking behind her and hot on her heels. But every whip over her shoulder only reflected her own path. There wasn't much of a pull to return to the village empty-handed, the same way all the hunting men had. Sarah wanted to stay until she had a chance to prove herself to the unknown beast. The comments from her mother swirled around her, telling her what young ladies did and didn't do. She wouldn't forget the scowls from people around the village when she brought up the disappearances or the monster. Everyone looked at her as a weak girl who was being impolite for asking questions or saying she thought she might be able to catch him. Sarah was looked down on, and very little could make that go away. All she could do was prove them wrong. Roaming through the woods until sunset gave Sarah a ripple of anticipation. If she didn't meet her monster in the daylight, would she at night? She could feel it. He was watching her and planning his attack. Unlike the men around and outnumbering him, he didn't need to hide from Sarah. It was hardly dark enough when a rustling of trees caught her attention. She stopped in her tracks, observing the sound of digging and clawing coming from inside one of the spots of the trees. Sarah's heartbeat raced, sending the same buzz of nervous excitement as the night before. Instead of fleeing from danger, Sarah inched towards it. She couldn't see anything at first, just the movement of the layers of trees. But then it came into focus, the pair of yellow eyes, piercing a hole to her in its stare. Sarah jumped back and caught herself. "Hello?" she said. She would draw him out with the voice as sweet as honey. The eyes stared back at her and remained hidden in the shrubbery. The glow looked unnatural. Her breath quickened as she watched, unsure exactly how the beast would reveal itself. But Sarah wouldn't let the unknown change what she came in the forest to do. Instead, she watched the beast in the darkness, watching its hungry, vengeful glare. The next move was his. Unsure of how much time was passing, Sarah broke her stare and looked around for signs of the other missing girls. What might be left behind of the 6 of them? A dress and shoes? But there wasn't anything to hint this monster left items behind to tell his tale. That meant if Sarah failed her mission, no trace of her would be left behind either. Twigs snapped with each of their moves, and Sarah heard the monster's mouth peel open to reveal rows of thick teeth. A snarl grew from the depths of the beast and filled the space between him and Sarah. She backed away without shifting her eyes away. "I've wanted to meet you." Her voice was small, despite her attempt to make it sound stronger. Sarah's method wasn't to approach the beast by overpowering him. She would deliver him trust and openness, letting him think that he was the one that held the power. He would see her the way the rest of the world did, the naive, powerless girl with no business being a huntress. The beast moved out of the trees, lurching at Sarah in one swift motion, but Sarah dodged the attack as she jumped away from him. She watched him carefully with a sad look. "You don't want to be friends?" she asked. The monster's yellow eyes narrowed and the glow started to soften. The snarl was no longer there, but the danger persisted. Sarah knew she would have to take him by surprise. Playing as his interested friend would be a start. "Do you live here?" she asked him, looking up at the freshly dark sky. The moon shone through the trees and offered her enough light to see her surroundings. She took her time looking at the monster and could feel his eyes watching her every move. He swiped at her cloak and tore off the edge of the back that trailed behind her as she moved through the world. Sarah retaliated and lunged at the monster. Her niceness was over. The tackle sent him to the ground and Sarah's nerves buzzed. She pinned him to the ground with the weight of her body and watched him thrash beneath her. Guttural growls plummeted from him as Sarah stared into those glowing eyes. She could see what he was made of. He preyed on those who he thought were the weakest, but he was mistaken to think that she was the same. The nails of the beast broke the delicate skin of her wrist. The slice burned, yet hardly compared to the burn she had in her soul to prove to everyone that they were wrong without question. Sarah drove her thumbs into the throat of the beast. The pressure muffled the grunts, and the thrashing of the body slowed. She held on as she waited for the thrashing to end. She didn't meet him with fear or aggression the way others had, both victims and hunters. Her monster bucked up one last time beneath her, and his body weakened to a stop. It wasn't the gruesome overhaul the men had in mind. Sarah did it her own way. Using all her strength, she lifted the monster up from the forest floor. Dirt crumbled off him and stained her crimson cloak. Sarah didn't dare leave him behind to be found and claimed by the men of her village as their prize. His weight pressed hard on her shoulders, but she stood tall. With each stride forward towards the line of the forest where her village began, uncertain who might be waiting for her, she rushed. The cold night air failed to cool the boiling of her blood as she approached the distinguishing line of nature and civilization. Sarah emerged from the dark forest, a thick mist surrounding her as the monster hung over her shoulders like an accessory. She saw the torches first. Their flames flickered and led her towards home. A small crowd had gathered, no longer just the men serving as hunters in the night. Men and women watched her break free from the depths of the trees, the beast on her back. Silence overtook them, further showing Sarah how different she was now. She received looks of shock and awe, but the men would have received a roar of praise if they arrived at the beast on their backs. Sarah planted her feet in the dirt. The young girl everyone overlooked and underestimated was carrying the weight of the tamed evil on her shoulders. The silence of the crowd was deafening, and in one swift motion, Sarah dropped the beast onto the ground. The end.